Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount, and the Beatitudes. Jesus actually starts this sermon there. And we talked about some pretty nice things like poor in spirit, mourning. That's not a fun one, but the good news is they will be comforted. The meek, a whole bunch of stuff about meekness. The hungry and thirsty for righteousness. I mean, that's pretty positive stuff. The merciful, they're shown mercy. The pure in heart get to see God. And last time we talked about peacemakers who will be called the sons of God. And then now we're ready for verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Don't like the idea of persecution, personally. It's going on and happening all around the globe. We are insulated from it because we're isolated from it. And this, I will have to say, is a blessing from God. But it doesn't mean it's not happening around the world. The thousands of Christians every week are murdered because of their faith. This is not just a first century thing where, Roman emperors and other despots are, extinguishing Christians because of the political issue. No. There are people who are persecuted, and I'm not exaggerating when I say thousands of them are forfeiting their lives for their faith. When I was a kid, during the Cold War, one of the things that preachers sometimes would do is they would draw the word picture of we're all here in the auditorium. Of course, they would call it the sanctuary on Sunday, and suddenly the back doors are kicked open, and in come soldiers, guns loaded and pointed at us. Would you have the strength to not give in when they say anyone who rejects Christ and Christianity will be saved, but the rest, you will be eliminated? Would you have the courage and the strength? I don't know. I want to say yes. And I hope this isn't horrible to say, but I'm just so very grateful I've never had to make that choice. And I've talked about this before, but it's worth, banging this drum some more. In the West, in America, we mistake inconvenience for persecution. The internet's down. Why am I persecuted? I have to pay to see that football game. Why am I persecuted? I mean, nobody does that. But there is such a thing as actual persecution. And it takes many forms. In Jesus' day, one of the ways that people were persecuted because of their faith in God and in Christ, persecuted because of righteousness. This is not the same thing as getting a ticket because I was speeding. It is where I have done the right thing and I am still punished. In Jesus' day, that happened in many forms. One of the most common, and remember, Jesus' audience was not Gentile, it was Jew. And in the Jewish community, one of the significant persecutions was to be excluded from the synagogue. Because if you were excluded, or we might call it excommunicated, from the synagogue, what that basically meant was you were boxed out of community life. Because the gathering at the synagogue was representative of the nature of the community, and you're excluded from that. And one of the other things that it would mean is you might not be able to go and do business with a fellow Jew if you'd been kicked out of the synagogue. They're not going to want to have anything to do with you. The fear of being kicked out of the synagogue was not small. Jesus healed a man born blind, and the transformation was so dramatic. People were saying, "Wait, isn't this the guy who was born blind?" And the guy said, "Yeah, that's me." The Pharisees this is upsetting to them, and so they drag him in and interrogate him, and then they call his parents in, and is this the and they kind of kowtow out of fear of being cast out of the synagogue. It was real. We don't have, generally, I don't know of anybody who has this fear of being cast out of their church for doing what is right. Oh, really? Oh. There are churches that are so broken and so diseased and dysfunctional that if somebody points out the disease and dysfunction, they're out. There may not be a big public kangaroo court, but they will be excluded. And I have heard stories of this. I'm so grateful I've never experienced it, but I've heard enough stories of this kind of thing happening to know, hey, it's real. All right. Let's go back to, why are these people persecuted? Because of their rightness, for righteousness, because they have submitted their lives and organized their lives around God's design. That's what righteousness is. And some of them, and it's not like, okay, this is everybody, and if you're not being persecuted, it means you're not being righteous. I don't think that at all. But I do think when being persecuted is the result of this choice, and then the follow through on the choice to live according to God's design, Jesus says, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, it wouldn't make any sense to any of us, I don't think, for us to say, you know what, only those who have been persecuted will have and be included in the kingdom of heaven. No, that's not what Jesus was saying. But I do think he's saying, when persecuted for righteousness, don't lose track, don't forget your home is heaven. Your real kingdom is the kingdom of heaven. I lose track of that all the time. Because right now is so real to me, and it's right here in my face. You ever get that? You ever have that happen? It just, okay, little side trail. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. Well, okay. What if we started living like this world is not our home? What if we began to live like we are temporary residents, but our citizenship is in heaven? Oh, okay. And he goes on now, and this is I think it's an expansion on blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. He says in verse 11, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. There are things about being a Christian in America that I am so grateful for. I am so grateful that I'm free to worship. I'm free to express my convictions. I'm free to talk about these things with others. There are countries and cultures where this is not permitted. There is a culture where people are not quite as free to talk about their faith and express their convictions. And you don't have to really go outside the U.S. to find them. I have a high regard for Christian educators, teachers in our public schools. They are, well, Jesus is going to talk about salt and light, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. They are salt and light. And I suppose there could be a jurisdiction where this is not true, but my understanding is, this is true in Nevada, and I think it's true in all the states, a teacher cannot bring up their faith and issues of faith unless a student inquires about it, and then they can share. I don't think that's persecution. I think it gives us a context that we have to live and work within. I wish that it was okay for a teacher to talk about their religious belief, their faith. But here's the other part of that. And I don't think it gets very much attention. If I'm a public school teacher and a Christian, if I had the right to promote my faith and instruct students regarding my faith, then wouldn't the Buddhist have that same right? Wouldn't the Muslim have that same right? Wouldn't the atheist have that same right? Well, of course they would. Okay. All right. When Jesus, I mean, he becomes pretty specific. You are insulted, you're persecuted, and people falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. That sets the context. And that's really what I think Jesus is more or less defining what it is to be persecuted for righteousness. When we live in that sort of way, we're going to take a risk. There always will be a risk that people will resent us and misunderstand us and misrepresent us. Frankly, I've not had that happen outside of the church. Okay, I'll do better next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.